Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net. Happy New Year, everybody. Um, I wanted to tell a fun little story that I ended up telling over the New Year's. It was a story that happened a long time ago, probably around at least 8 years ago, I would say. And it has to do with time travel. Now, I love time travel stories. The first trilogy that I ever loved in my entire life, the first trilogy of movies I ever loved, was not any of the Star Trek movies or the Star Wars movies. It was actually the Back to the Future movies. And those movies still to this day hold a big place in my heart. Now, of course, I'm sure everybody's interested in time travel due to like Avengers Endgame and stuff like that. I'm sure that many of them have questions about who have seen any time travel movie, like how possible is this? And then you could enter Quantum Break, or the game that we're going to be talking about a little bit today, which has to do with this story, Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger, as far as I know, was the first non-licensed game that I can remember that that had to do with time travel, that used time travel as a core mechanic. Obviously, there was the Back to the Future games before them, but they were all completely god awful. At least the ones in the United States were all completely god awful, so we won't speak of those anymore. But this story has to do with that. Many years ago, I was working as a substitute teacher. We're going to get a little personal here. And one day I was assigned to work as a science teacher for a high school. And of course, I wear many hats. And I said to him, yeah, no problem, put me in. So as I'm going to class and getting ready to, teach the curriculum for the day in that particular science classroom, I bore witness to a adjacent classroom where the professor was standing outside of his classroom and having a lively conversation with one of the students. And the student had just played Chrono Trigger for the very first time, or was in the process of playing the game Chrono Trigger for the very first time. And he had all these questions about it, about time travel, about structures, about what we know about the concept of time. Because this game had just completely opened his mind and presented all these questions. My gosh, a video game can actually do that. Yes, it can. Trust me, I know. I've known that for about the last 30 years. But this kid had all these questions for the science teacher. Because the kid was trying to understand, how is it that you can go forward into time, stop, see how messed up it is, go back into time to try to improve that status, create a new and then create either a new future or adjust the present in such a way that it has improved. Isn't this a problem with the grandfather paradox? Because the reason you traveled into the past in the first place was because of an ominous future. Fixing that, going back and fixing that the future is no longer ominous, but so did you go back in the first place? And I had to explain to him, time travel doesn't work that way. I know that everybody's been talking about the grandfather paradox being the reason why time travel doesn't exist. We'll get into that later. Quantum Break actually says their rules are that you can't actually affect time. Even if you saw an ominous future, you can't change it. You might even, or if you attempted to, you'd probably be the cause of it in the first place. You are physically incapable of changing the future, at least the future that you've seen. And we won't go into Doctor Who or anything like that, at least not right now. So I presented to him an alternative. And what I said was kind of going on a little bit of Back to the Future rules, but going under, at least from what we knew at the time, as to how quantum mechanics would have put it. Now, who am I? I'm just a guy who's slightly older than him. The professor didn't know who I was, probably assumed I was a substitute teacher, and rightfully so, but he didn't know who I was. But I hear their conversation, I walk up to a kid, and I basically say, imagine that if you have time represented as a straight line, if you could if you could travel through time, well, obviously you can go anywhere on the line you want. But if you alter an event, the timeline will then skew into an alternative. You can't get to it anymore from that point, at least not through natural time means. But that skewed timeline still exists. My fiance has referred to this as the multiverse theory, or at least an adaptation of the multiverse theory. Now, from what I've been told, based upon the current work of Michio Kaku, and granted this was from a couple of years ago, so for all we know he could have come up with new theories, but at least from what we know about quantum mechanics, if time travel is possible, you will create a new, every time it's used, you will create another timeline. You basically create a multiverse, or you basically create your own mini-verse, essentially, every time the time machine is used. The only problem, at least with Michio Kaku's theory, was that you can't get back to your previous timeline no matter what. Even if you traveled into the future, the only thing that will affect the timeline that you just left was that you're no longer in it. Things will still progress. But to you, however, you will have traveled into a different time. And we're going to get a little head spinny here for a second, of a completely different universe. That's where the grandfather paradox comes in. Nothing, because you've created a multiverse, because you've created a new multiverse when you travel through time, nothing that you do, again, other than the fact that you just left your previous time and you're not going back, you're not coming back, at least not to that universe, is not going to be affected. If you went, let's say, for example, you leave time, go into the past, change something, whether you go into the future again or whether you just wait, the only thing that changes is that universe and whatever universe you go into after that. Your previous universe you left is not affected. That's quantum theory, at least as far as we know it. With Back to the Future, for example, they basically said it's one continuous line that is constantly changing with the ripple effect. That's what Doc Brown called it, the ripple effect. And that anytime you traveled either forward or backwards in time, even if you change something, everybody will still exist except for the time, or at least, and with adjusted memories, except for the time travel. The time travel will retain memories of the event, but basically, if you've changed anything, it will instantaneously affect current present time. There's no multiverse theory there. There's a chance of alternate timelines happening, and there's also the concern of the grandfather paradox. And Doc is always saying we can't interfere with the grandfather, with basically the grandfather paradox, because if that happens, we could literally blow up everything. So Doc had to be very cautious about that. At least that was Back to the Future's rules. I don't agree with those rules, but there is one component about this. Is time travel possible? I would say I'm open to the possibility. When I was a kid, I was really gung-ho about this. I did all the research I possibly could. I actually, I'm not even joking. When I was like 12, I was actually reading quantum physics books, actually. I was basically sure the basis for that Men in Black joke or whatever. But yeah, I was very much interested in that stuff. And of course, even Michio Kaku kind of said this. If time travel was possible, it would all come down to power. We don't have enough. There's not enough power. Even all the power generated right now, with all the factories and all the power plants that we've got right now, isn't enough to travel through time, either forwards or backwards. We need a lot more power. Now, what would do it? Plutonium? No. So, maybe Star Trek's warp core might be able to do it. Just a thought. Obviously, we've not actually been able to invent a warp core, but from what I know about the warp core, there'd probably be enough power there. So, maybe Star Trek got it right. Who knows? But as far as I know, there has not been a warp core that's actually been invented yet. And from what I've been told from most of the equations that I've seen from people who think that warp travel is possible, even they say that the amount of power that's required for that sort of thing is, again, that would probably be the same amount of power, just about the same amount of power as it would be for time travel. I'm probably wrong about that. Time travel probably requires more power than faster than light travel, but we'll say. Let's have a be all and end goal. So where am I going with this? I gotta say that I want to give props. This is basically a tribute. This video, in its entirety, is a tribute to that game Chrono Trigger. And I remembered when I was a kid, 1995, I was going over a friend's house. My friend had a Super Nintendo. And there were two games that he demoed for me on that Super Nintendo, both of which always stuck with me for my entire life. One was Earthbound, which I talked about in the past, I think, and the other was Chrono Trigger. And I remember for the longest time hoping that like the Wii would bring like Chrono Trigger or Earthbound to its virtual console. It did eventually bring Chrono Trigger to its virtual console. Earthbound also went to its virtual console, but that wouldn't be until the Wii U came out. And now I think that Earthbound is actually available on the Super Nintendo Classic, but not Chrono Trigger, which is unfortunate, but what are you going to do? It's, like I said, I'm pretty certain it's still available for download on like the Wii or something. But a game actually did that. A game actually existed that provoked scientific discussion in a classroom with students and their teacher. I was told my whole life that was not a possibility. I was told my whole life video games made you dumb. Guess that's not true, is it? Well, if you guys have your comments about time travel or whatever, post a comment below. That's fine. I actually did get a copy of Chrono Trigger, although I probably have like one of the worst copies of it. I have the PS1 version of it, actually. I did eventually get a sealed PS1 copy of the game that I think was bundled with like Final Fantasy IV, if I remember correctly. Square Enix later, they did do a PS1 port of it. From what I was told, other than the fact that it was load times and slowdowns, it's still Chrono Trigger, so it's great. What I was told, the DS version is the best, and I've never gotten my hands on the DS version. One of my regrets. Until next time, guys, my name is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Take care, over and out.